We all know that Simon was renamed Peter the Rock. But how does a fisherman survive the week that shatters the strongest of men? We'll follow the simple man who went from boasting he would die for his master to denying him 3 times in one night. In today's video, we'll talk about the profound human journey of the fisherman, Simon, as he learns how to survive the storm of Passion Week and become the rock. So let's not waste any time, and let's begin. You feel the cool, ancient, and deeply comforting stone beneath your body. A brief, welcome reprieve after the long, dusty, and emotionally taxing journey into Jerusalem. The air here, high on the Mount of Olives, is sharp and still, carrying the scent of pine and wild thyme, mercifully cleansing your lungs of the city's dense, earthy human smell that clings to your clothing. You are Simon, the burly fisherman from Bethsaida, a man whose hands are permanently curved from years of hauling thick, wet nets. Your temper is rough and quick, mirroring the sudden squalls of the Galilee. Yet, you carry a name that is far too heavy for your shoulders. Cephas, the rock. That single name is the core, grating tension of your existence, a constant whisper of an impossible, almost divine future placed against the loud, honest clamor of your impulsive, utterly human past. It feels like a magnificent, smooth cornerstone carved from cheap, crumbling, and slightly porous clay. The contrast between your nature and your title leaves you constantly winded. You remember the day he gave it to you, a moment of dazzling clarity that you have spent every day since trying and failing to live up to. The rock. A word of stability in a world of shifting sand. You watch the immensity of the holy city sprawling below. A vast, intimidating sprawl of limestone walls and rooftops catching the last, defiant, fiery light of the setting sun. The site is not a spiritual sanctuary right now. It is a political pressure cooker, a place of power and paranoia soon to be swollen beyond bursting by hundreds of thousands of pilgrims gathered for the Passover feast. You can almost feel the collective anxiety radiating up the hill, a low, nervous thrumming like distant thunder. In just a few days, this entire world will shift on its axis. And deep in your fisherman's gut, you know it. Your master has told you so, detailing suffering, betrayal, and death with a chilling, unsettling clarity you desperately and loudly tried to deny. The memory of his words hangs over you now, like the heavy, suffocating, crimson cloak of evening. You try to push the images of chains and scourges from your mind, but they persist, etching themselves onto the backs of your eyelids every time you blink. You want to argue with the very air itself, to demand that the story must proceed differently, toward triumph and earthly glory, not this downward spiral toward the grave. The words you spoke were hot, born of pure, instinctive love and fear, pouring out of you before your mind could even process the logic. Lord, this shall never happen to you. You meant only to protect him, to draw a clear line between divine prophecy and the physical reality you, a man of action, could control. But the rebuke you received was immediate, searing, and cutting deeper than any physical lash. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. The words still burn, a bitter, metallic taste in the back of your throat. You, the self-proclaimed rock, were called a scandalon, a stumbling block, a piece of loose rubble, a dangerous hazard placed directly in the path he must walk. You clench your jaw, feeling the familiar, uncomfortable heat of shame rise up your neck, drying the moisture from your lips. It is a humiliation that has taught you more about humility than 3 years of sermons. Every time you open your mouth to make a boast or a promise, the phantom voice of your master reminds you of your inherent human weakness. Survival, you now understand with a terrifying clarity that settles into your bones, is not about fighting the Roman soldiers with your fists or surviving the angry mob with brute strength. You possess the basic animal courage for that. You proved it years ago with a reckless, half-forgotten fist fight in the market over a fishing quota. No, the true survival at stake is the endurance of this tiny, persistent, but fragile faith that has somehow taken permanent root in your calloused, earthly heart. The Master is demanding a strength from you that is not of this world, a spiritual resilience that your physical self, honed only by the Galilee storms and heavy lifting, has no experience with. You are a seasoned sailor asked to suddenly navigate a desert of dry, treacherous sand. The exhaustion is beginning to pull at your limbs now, heavy, seductive, and almost irresistible. It is not just the weariness of the road, though the miles have been many. It is the profound spiritual fatigue of bearing the collective weight of prophecy and impossible expectation. You rest your head against the thick, muscular trunk of a gnarly olive tree, feeling the rough bark scratch lightly against your ear. You need this stillness. You desperately need this moment to empty your mind of all the conflicting voices before the noise and the decisive action of Passion Week fully descend upon you. The weight of being Peter, the flawed, fearful, but chosen rock, is momentarily too much to bear. You whisper the name Simon, the name of your old self, the simple fisherman, savoring its quiet, familiar sound, a tired plea for just one more moment of peace before the inevitable storm. You watch the final few lamps and torches of the immense city wink out, one by one, like scattered stars, as the dense, absolute darkness of the week ahead settles in around you. You let your eyes slowly close, seeking a temporary rest, a brief, blessed oblivion before the trumpet of chaos finally sounds. You feel the deep, overwhelming exhaustion preceding the coming week, pushing you toward necessary, momentary repose. You must find temporary peace before the storm breaks, for you know, deep down, that you will not sleep again for a very long time. The relief of escaping the city's anxious press settles over you like a gentle, warming blanket as you arrive in Bethany. This small village, tucked away on the southeastern slope of the Mount of Olives, feels like a deliberate pause in the unfolding drama. You walk through the open doorway into the home of Lazarus, a place that always smells faintly of warm bread, dried figs, and quiet, persistent hope. Lazarus, whom the Master raised from the dead, is reclining at the table, his presence an impossible testament to the power you believe in, a power that should surely save the Master from the fate he insists awaits him. You settle onto a low cushion, letting the tension seep out of your back. Martha, with her characteristic whirlwind of focused energy, directs the serving of the meal. She moves with a steady, soothing efficiency. The rhythmic scrape of a spoon against a bowl, the soft thud of a linen napkin, all creating a gentle, auditory pattern that is deeply comforting. The food is simple but restorative. Lentils simmered with garlic, unleavened bread still warm from the oven, and sweet, sticky date syrup. You focus intently on the texture of the thick porridge on your tongue, attempting to ground yourself in the immediate physical reality of the nourishment. The atmosphere, however, is heavy, weighted by an unacknowledged knowledge. It is a quiet before the great storm you felt brewing from the mountaintop. No one speaks of Jerusalem, of the temple, or of the escalating threat from the Sanhedrin. Instead, the conversation is soft, centering on familiar memories from the Galilee, the time you almost sank the boat, the absurdity of the tax collectors, the simplicity of feeding a large crowd with so little. These are comfortable, worn stories, told now not for laughter, but for the safety they momentarily create. Then the mood shifts with the entrance of Mary, Lazarus' sister. She moves slowly, almost deliberately, drawing every eye in the room, not by demanding attention, but by embodying a stillness so profound it requires silence. She approaches the master and kneels behind him, her movements unhurried. You hear the small, sharp crack as she breaks the seal of an alabaster jar. Immediately, an overwhelming, exotic fragrance fills the small room, cutting through the scent of lentils and wood smoke. It is nard, a precious oil imported from faraway lands, a scent so pure and expensive it instantly triggers your ingrained sense of fisherman's economy. You see Judas Iscariot shift restlessly on his cushion, and you feel the familiar prickle of annoyance at his self-serving piety. He is the first to speak, but your own thoughts echo his complaint, wrapped in a defensive layer of righteous indignation. Why this waste? This oil is worth 300 denarii, a year's wages. It should have been sold and given to the poor. The words feel heavy and dull, a practical argument against a moment of such transcendent beauty. You struggle to reconcile the extravagance with the simple humility of the master you follow, a man who owns nothing but the room on his back. You watch Mary use her long hair, unbound and loose, to gently wipe the excess oil from his feet. It is an act of total, uncalculating devotion, and you feel a profound discomfort, a friction between your pragmatic, worldly view and the boundless love displayed before you. You are deeply confused by the gesture, wondering what purpose this grand, costly sacrifice serves when the very survival of the movement is in question. Shouldn't the money be kept for future travel? Shouldn't it be used to feed the hungry you constantly minister to? The master's voice is soft, yet it commands the entire room, extinguishing your internal debate with a gentle firmness. He defends Mary, explaining that she is preparing him for burial. The words hit you with a fresh, sickening weight. Burial. The reality is too sharp, too immediate. You had convinced yourself that his suffering was a metaphor, a trial he would escape through divine intervention. But Mary's fragrant act forces you to confront the certainty of his mortal end. You watch Judas gather his cloak, his face an unreadable mask, and you feel a wave of suspicion. Not just suspicion of him, but of your own quick, judgmental reaction. You realize your indignation was rooted less in concern for the poor and more in your own pragmatic, earthly fear of poverty and loss. Your heart is cheapened by the moment, and the contrast between Mary's pure offering and your own calculations makes you feel spiritually impoverished. The heavy silence returns as the perfume lingers, a thick, cloying sweetness that now feels foreboding, a rich scent fit for a funeral. It is the last moment of true peace before the inevitable collision with fate. You stand up, feeling the need to move, to leave this room where holiness and betrayal have just shared the same air. The sweet, lingering scent of the expensive nard oil accompanies you as you walk out the door and back onto the dark, unlit road toward Jerusalem. It is a fragrance of sacrifice and death, a constant, sickening reminder that the Master is walking toward his end. You glance back at the house, feeling a moment of self-reproach, knowing that your own self-righteousness, shared with Judas's cold malice, has polluted this moment of pure, extravagant love. You cannot wait for the morning to break the heavy silence of the night. Even if the morning brings the crowd, you feel the sun, already high and unforgiving, beating down on the road as you begin the final descent toward the city gates. The heat is dry and immediate, soaking into the thick wool of your outer cloak and raising a sheen of sweat on your brow. You are caught in a current, a tidal wave of expectation, noise, and sheer physical momentum. This is the day the crowd calls him king, and the psychological rush is intoxicating, making your exhaustion from the previous night momentarily vanish. The air is thick with the dust kicked up by thousands of feet, pilgrims, sightseers, and disciples all surging forward. It coats your throat, your teeth, and the inner lining of your cloak, but you barely notice, consumed by the collective excitement. The crowd is deafening, a roar composed of every dialect and language under the sun, shouting the words of the ancient prophecies. Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. You look at the Master, riding humbly on a young donkey, and you feel a proud, almost possessive surge of triumph. This is it. This is the moment the years of wandering, the endless sermons, the near starvations, and the constant threats have been leading to. You envision the grand coronation, the swift overthrow of the Roman legionaries, and the establishment of the kingdom right here, right now, with you, the Rock, standing firmly at his right hand. This is the kind of survival you understand. Physical, triumphant, and guaranteed by massive public support. You exert yourself physically, using your bulk and strength to move through the thickest parts of the crowd, instinctively protecting the small space around the donkey. You clear the path, you shout down skeptics, and you revel in the attention. People point at you, the rugged fisherman, recognizing you as one of the innermost circle, one of the trusted guards of this new, sudden revolution. You feel a genuine, glorious sense of success, a reward for the years of sacrifice, believing that the time for quiet suffering is finally over. The smells are overwhelming. Fresh sweat, strong perfume from the wealthy few, the sour scent of unwashed bodies, and the sharp, clean aroma of the freshly cut palm fronds. The fronds are everywhere, covering the path, being waved in the air, creating a chaotic, festive canopy that signals a revolution is underway. You bend down and pick up a handful of fronds yourself, waving them wildly over your head, completely carried away by the belief that this moment is entirely about earthly victory. You push past a stern-faced Roman centurion who stands stock still, radiating an unnerving silence amidst the clamor, and you flash a look of challenge, feeling immune in the midst of the throng. For this brief golden hour, the spiritual complexities of prophecy and suffering are forgotten. You are the faithful disciple of the soon-to-be king, and the power of the mob is your temporary shield. You feel the physical exertion of walking through this dense, shouting crowd, your calf muscles burning, your shoulders aching from the constant effort of pressing forward. But the pain is a glorious, worthwhile signal of your loyalty. You remember the quiet prediction of denial, the terrible image of the rooster, and the humiliation of being called Satan, and you laugh inwardly, dismissing those memories as fleeting shadows. How could any of that be true now? Look at this adulation. Look at the thousands singing his praise. The true Messiah, the King, does not suffer humiliation. He commands armies and accepts the homage of the nations. Your emotional high is absolute, soaring past caution or doubt. Finally, the surge carries you through the busy streets and into the vast, open courtyards of the temple complex. The transition is startling, an immediate and chilling shift in atmosphere. The enormous bronze gates swallow the noise, muffling the celebratory roar of the crowds outside. Inside the holy outer court, the excitement instantly dissipates. The people are still shouting, but the sound here seems hollow, weak, absorbed by the massive, polished stone walls. The silence is unsettling, a sudden, heavy pressure that replaces the buoyant energy of the street. You look around and see hundreds of priests and Sadducees, dressed in immaculate white robes, standing like stone pillars, watching the entrance. Their faces are not joyous. They are masks of deep, terrifying anger, their eyes burning with cold, aristocratic disdain. The air is suddenly cold, despite the midday sun. You feel the celebratory high instantly deflate, leaving you feeling exposed, overheated, and foolishly loud. The palm frond in your hand, so recently a symbol of revolution, now feels like a dried, brittle leaf. The silence of the powerful observers is much louder than the shouts of the cheering masses. You realize with a sudden, sinking anxiety that you have not just brought a prophet into the city, you have brought a fundamental threat right to the doorstep of the city's true power brokers. You wonder, with a quick, painful confusion, what comes next, knowing that this celebratory moment has sealed their fate, not their fortune. The unsettling silence of the temple courtyard is immediately, violently broken. The air, which moments ago felt heavy with religious tradition and clerical disapproval, is suddenly charged with chaos. You watch the master, who had just entered the court with such deliberate humility, undergo a breathtaking and terrifying transformation. The familiar quietness leaves his eyes, replaced by a terrible, focused intensity, a cold, righteous fury that you have never witnessed. He begins moving, not toward the altar or the teaching steps, but toward the endless rows of tables where money changers and merchants operate their cynical enterprise. The sound of coins is constant here, the metallic clinking, the scraping of shekels and denarii, a sound that usually signifies commerce, but which now sounds like the rattle of spiritual corruption. You see him grab a handful of loose ropes and quickly twist them into a crude whip, a tool of immediate physical consequence. The shock paralyzes you only for a moment before your fisherman's instincts, the fight or flight response honed by a life of danger, take over. The violence is sudden. The sharp crack of the rope whip, the crash of the first table, and the sickening sound of metal coinage scattering across the hard, polished stone floor. The merchants and animal vendors scream, their voices a sudden symphony of fear, confusion, and rage. You feel a momentary admiration for the sheer raw power of his transformation, a confirmation that he holds the physical authority you always dreamed of. But that admiration is quickly swallowed by the primal fear of the scene. You quickly shield yourself, tucking your head down and instinctively protecting your face from the flying debris. The tables are heavy wooden things, piled with equipment, and they crash with startling force, splintering on impact. The cooing and bleating of the sacrificial doves and sheep turn into shrieks of terror, their cages overturned, scattering feathers and confused animals across the courtyard. You realize this is not a gentle teaching moment. This is an act of shocking, direct, and unforgivable warfare against the established religious economy. You are acutely aware of the smells, the rich, pungent odor of freshly spilled milk and wine, the sharp tang of animal sweat, and the metallic scent of coins, now mixed with the bitter smell of fear. You instinctively try to secure the animals that stumble past, but the confusion is too great. The scattered silver and bronze coins roll and spin along the pavement, and a dark thought flashes through your mind, a moment of avarice, even amidst the terror. That is a lot of money wasted. You quickly push the shameful thought away. Your internal struggle is immediate and profound. Part of you wants to join the chaos, to yell and clear the court with your master, using your own muscle to smash the idols of greed. But a wiser, newly emerging part of you is paralyzed, recognizing the enormous, deadly consequences of this action. This is not simply a breach of order. It is a declaration that the priests and the Sadducees who profit from this system are spiritually bankrupt. You see the deep-seated anger of the temple police and the money changers, their initial shock turning into cold, murderous resentment. You glance toward the high portico, away from the immediate violence, and see the leaders of the Sanhedrin, the men of power, the chief priests, not actively intervening, but watching in utter silence from the shadow of the colonnade. Their expressions are colder than the stone beneath your feet, radiating an aristocratic fury that is more terrifying than the physical chaos of the whip. They do not need to fight. They only need to wait and judge. The noise slowly begins to subside, replaced by the broken sound of weeping merchants and the low, furious murmuring of the priests. The court is a scene of wreckage, broken jars, splintered wood, and the lingering, awful sound of a few trapped doves fluttering helplessly. Jesus stands utterly still amidst the ruins, his chest heaving slightly, his face pale but resolved, the unused whip hanging loose in his hand. The air thickens with the unspoken threat of institutional retaliation. You realize with a sickening certainty that the cleansing was not a moment of victory, but a catastrophic, final declaration of war against the city's highest powers. It was a fatal strike against their pocketbooks and their spiritual authority. The leaders in the shadows have seen enough. They did not raise a hand, but you can feel the deep-seated, homicidal anger hardening their resolve. You feel a profound, sudden need to leave the exposed courtyard and find the anonymity of the crowded streets before the inevitable trap is sprung. The day after the fury in the temple is marked by a heavy, profound psychological exhaustion. The adrenaline of the confrontation has completely evaporated, leaving behind a dull, aching emptiness in your chest and a throbbing fatigue in your legs. You are grappling with the weight of the temple conflict, the memory of shattered tables, and the cold, terrifying faces of the chief priests. Every noise now sounds like the approach of a Roman cohort. You are walking back into the city from your rest in Bethany, consumed by these anxieties, when the master points toward a fig tree standing by the roadside. It is covered in leaves, a deceptive green burst of life in the dusty landscape. But when he approaches it, there are no figs, nothing but the outward show of life. His words are quiet, but carry the shattering force of a heavy stone. He curses the tree, and you walk on, confused but obedient, your mind still reeling from the events of the previous day. For hours, he teaches in the temple courts, surrounded by skeptical listeners, posing complex parables that challenge the authorities. You stand near him, trying to track the elaborate stories, the tenants in the vineyard who kill the heir, the guests who refuse the wedding feast, but your mental fatigue is overwhelming. It is difficult to grasp the complicated metaphors when your soul is focused on the simple, practical question of physical escape and survival. Your eyelids are heavy, and the relentless heat of the courtyard makes you drowsy. Later, as you pass the fig tree again, you notice the transformation. It is withered from the roots up, a shocking, sudden collapse of life. The change is total, a visual metaphor that cuts through your mental fog. The master uses the moment not to display power, but to teach a lesson about faith and true fruitfulness, contrasting outward appearance with inner reality. You realize the lesson is aimed directly at you, the man of boastful promises who is so often inwardly barren. The fig tree's sudden death makes you reflect on your own spiritual bravado. You are the man who swore eternal loyalty, the man who insists he is the rock, the man who impulsively drew a sword. You are full of leaves, full of outward show and passionate declarations. But you fear you carry no true fruit, no deep, sustaining substance of unwavering obedience. Your physical weariness is compounded by this mental exhaustion, the pain of trying to understand concepts that require a deeper spiritual peace than you currently possess. You feel the dry, dusty air on your skin and the grit of the road crunching beneath your sandals, trying to bring yourself back to the simple, tangible world. You remember the shame of the temple, the quick flash of greed over the scattered coins, and you realize that your heart, too, may be withered at the roots, offering only the green promise of leaves, nothing more. You struggle with the constant, high-stakes nature of his teaching. It is relentless, demanding everything from you, offering no comfort zone. The complex parables, the wicked tenants, the unresponsive guests seem to apply directly to the high priests and scribes who are constantly watching you. They too are full of leaves, ritual and tradition, but without the fruit of mercy or justice. But you realize with a sinking heart that you are not so different. You too struggle with giving your master the true fruit of patient, trusting faith, always wanting to substitute it with the brittle fruit of physical, immediate action. As the afternoon draws to a close and the master finishes his public teachings, you break away for a solitary, quiet moment. You walk back to the location of the withered fig tree, stepping carefully around its dry, fragile branches. You kneel near the blackened roots, feeling the cool earth in your hands. This is your quiet moment of private prayer. Your attempt to sort through the confusion that has plagued you since the warning on the mount. You feel the first seeds of profound self-doubt beginning to sprout. You question the true depth of your own inner reality compared to the bold, loud claims you constantly make. You wonder if, when the pressure truly comes, you will be found as barren and empty as this dead wood before you. This quiet, terrible uncertainty settles over you as the sun sinks low, washing the dusty fields in a final, judgmental orange light. You know that soon you will receive a command that will test this fruitfulness, a moment of practical focus that will demand your complete present attention. The narrative shifts from the open confrontation of the temple courts to the cold, creeping sensation of being actively hunted. The remaining days before the Passover feel less like teaching opportunities and more like a high-stakes cat-and-mouse game played out against the backdrop of an unsuspecting city. You are constantly tense, your senses heightened, straining to catch hushed conversations or the sound of footsteps too close behind you. This chapter is dominated by the sensory details of stealth and paranoia. You move with your shoulder muscles perpetually tight, your cloak pulled close to obscure your face. You notice every shift in the air, every sudden change in street noise. The feeling of being watched is constant, like an insect crawling just below the skin on your back. Whenever you pause to buy simple supplies, a loaf of bread, some water skins, you constantly glance over your shoulder, your eyes darting to every shaded doorway and upper story window. You are trying to act as a bodyguard, using your sheer bulk and intimidating presence to shield the master, but you feel clumsy and hopelessly out of place. Your fisherman's training is for the open sea and the direct confrontation of a storm. It is useless against the political intrigue and religious malice that surround you here. The city is a maze, and you feel like a great, slow beast caught in a spider's elegant web. The sense of active danger is magnified by your growing awareness of Judas Iscariot. He is present but disconnected, moving through the group with an irritating air of self-importance and frequent unexplained absences. The tension between his greed, which you have observed countless times, and his position as a disciple is now unbearable. The central focus is on this dawning, sick suspicion. You watch him talking quietly to himself, his fingers constantly rubbing together as if counting invisible coins, and you feel a wave of physical nausea. You cannot name the betrayal, but you feel the poison of it. You find yourself watching Judas's back, not the master's, convinced that the greatest danger lies not in the Roman legion or the Sanhedrin, but within your own small, flawed fellowship. You are annoyed by his constant distraction and his financial preoccupation, which makes you feel you are the only one truly loyal, the only one truly committed to the master's well-being. This self-righteousness acts as a temporary shield against your own failures and fears. You remember the argument over the expensive nard oil, and you see now that Judas's indignation was not for the poor, but for his own lost profit. The memory sends a cold shiver down your spine. You wish you could confront him, but you are paralyzed by the fear of being wrong, of creating a schism when the group needs to be whole. Instead, you channel your energy into a fierce, unspoken protectiveness around the master, trying to make your presence as a bulwark undeniable. The day feels endless, marked by the need to find secure shelter before nightfall. You realize that every decision now, where to walk, what house to enter, who to speak to, is fraught with mortal danger. The plotting is not a secret. It is a palpable atmosphere, a cold, dry wind blowing through the warm city. Then, you are pulled aside by the master, his hand heavy and purposeful on your shoulder. He gives you a practical, mundane task, one that demands immediate focus and physical action. You are to go with John and prepare the Passover meal. He gives you detailed instructions about the man you are to meet, the house you are to find, and the necessary supplies. The sudden practical focus is a lifeline, a return to the world you understand. The fear of betrayal, the paralyzing suspicion of Judas, and the anxiety about the Sanhedrin are momentarily pushed to the background, replaced by the simple, comforting demands of logistics. Finding the market, haggling for a lamb, preparing the bread. This necessity is a blessing. You grasp the master's words, feeling the renewed trust in the task itself. The final great act of service before the terrible finality. You nod to John, ready to move with purpose. The preparation of the Passover meal is a moment of practical focus, a simple, comforting requirement that temporarily pushes the fear of betrayal and the chilling sense of danger into the background. Focusing your mind on the work ahead, you follow the man with the water jar through the dense, winding streets of Jerusalem, John at your side, until you arrive at a quiet door in the upper city. You step into a room that is unlike the noisy taverns or the cramped homes you usually occupy. This upper room is spacious, clean, and dimly lit by oil lamps, creating long, dancing shadows that seem to hold their breath in the stillness. There is a long, low table set with the necessities for the Passover: unleavened bread, bitter herbs, wine, and the profound silence is immediately broken by the muffled sounds of the bustling city outside, a soft, distant hum of unaware life. The air inside is warm and thick with the scent of roasted lamb and dry spices. You are physically exhausted from the day's tensions, the endless paranoia of being hunted and the hurried preparations. You recline at the table, leaning your weight onto your left elbow, allowing the simple act of rest to momentarily alleviate the ache in your shoulders. Your feet, however, are heavy, dusty, and calloused from days of walking the hard, uneven roads. They feel rough against the soft linen of the cushion. You notice a small basin of water and a towel left near the entrance. a standard hospitality, but there is no servant present. The custom dictates that the lowest servant performs the washing, or, in their absence, the junior-most disciple. A heavy silence settles over the 12 of you, a tense stillness where every man knows the task needs doing, but none are willing to stoop to perform it. You watch your fellow disciples look everywhere but at the basin, their pride silently asserting its dominance in the quiet room. You yourself rationalize your refusal, convincing yourself that your seniority, your status as Cephas, the rock, exempts you from such menial service. The master, watching this unspoken contest of pride, slowly rises from the table. His movement is deliberate, utterly devoid of anger or judgment, yet it commands the room's entire attention. He lays aside his outer cloak, wrapping a rough, fresh linen towel around his waist. You watch him pick up the heavy clay basin and pour the cool, dusty water. The rhythmic sound of the water splashing into the basin is the loudest sound in the room, a sound of accusation that settles upon your shame. He approaches the disciple next to him first, kneeling in the posture of the lowest slave. The sight is jarring, deeply uncomfortable, and profoundly wrong. When he reaches you, you feel a wave of physical nausea. You see the deep creases in his forehead, the gentle focus in his eyes, and the immense, heartbreaking humility in the posture of his body, all kneeling before your massive, dirt-caked feet. The feeling is intensely awkward, violating every social and spiritual hierarchy you have ever known. You pull your feet back instinctively, a sharp, vehement refusal pouring out of your mouth before you can stop it. Lord, are you going to wash my feet? You are, convinced this is blasphemy, a spiritual misstep that you, the self-appointed guardian of tradition, must prevent. Your refusal is an act of deep spiritual pride, a subconscious belief that you are too good, too important, or too grand in your role to receive this service. The rock cannot be served by the master. The servant must serve the master. You tell him firmly that he shall never wash your feet. His response is quiet and direct, a command that penetrates your stubbornness instantly. If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. And this shifts the stakes immediately. This is not about cleanliness or social status. It is about belonging, about the very salvation you seek. The spiritual shock of separation is too great. The rock crumbles instantly, replaced by the impulsive Simon. You extend your feet with desperate haste, now begging for more. Lord, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. You want the entirety of his cleansing, the whole of the blessing, terrified of being left out. He smiles gently, a sad, knowing expression that settles the panic in your throat, explaining that you are already clean, save for the dust of the journey. He takes your rough, scarred foot, calloused from decades in heavy fisherman's sandals, smelling faintly of salt and the road, and submerges it into the cool, dusty water. The feeling of the water on your skin is initially jarring, then intensely, overwhelmingly soothing. As he gently scrubs the dried mud and dust away with the rough linen towel, you feel a floodgate of guilt about your past failures open inside you. You remember the boastfulness of the temple, the quick flash of greed, the constant doubts, the lack of faith, and the sheer arrogance of your refusal just moments ago. The act of service strips away not just the physical dust, but the layers of your self-righteousness, leaving you feeling crushed and utterly unworthy. You are exposed, served by the one who should be served. The quiet, gentle rubbing of the towel is a slow, humiliating balm that prepares you not for glory, but for the profound reality of your impending failure. He finishes, dries your feet meticulously, and puts his cloak back on. The silence that follows is now one of shame-filled awe. The cleansing is complete, leaving you spiritually naked and humbled, and you feel a terrible clarity that you are about to fail the man who just knelt before you. The realization sets the final, inevitable stage for the coming betrayal. You look around the table, knowing that the bread must come next. The solemnity of the foot washing lingers in the air, a cool, invisible mist that dampens the disciples' usual boisterousness. You feel completely undone, sitting back in your place, the skin on your freshly washed feet tingling with an unnatural cleanliness that highlights the rough texture of the rest of your body. Having just received the ultimate service, you are now hyper-aware of the quiet, deliberate movements of the Master as he returns to his place at the low table. The meal proceeds under a strange, heightened tension. You watch every small gesture of the Master, the way he breaks the unleavened bread, the way he pours the dark, rich Passover wine. The food, the symbolic herbs, the roasted lamb, tastes flat in your mouth, a dry counterpoint to the rush of emotion you have just experienced. You focus intently on the physical reality of the wine, its sharp, earthy tang, trying to use the sensation to ground yourself. Then he takes the bread, offering the formal prayer of blessing, his voice steady and low. He breaks it deliberately and hands a piece to each of you. Your piece of bread feels rough and porous between your fingers. His words, when they come, are shocking, a quiet thunderbolt. Take, eat, this is my body, which is given for you. The literal taste and texture of the bread, dry, brittle, and slightly burnt on the edges, becomes instantly symbolic, the physical reality colliding violently with the spiritual truth. You chew slowly, trying to absorb the incomprehensible meaning, realizing you are eating not just food, but a profound and shattering metaphor of himself. Next, he takes the cup of wine, holding it up so the flickering lamplight catches the dark liquid. He speaks again, with an even greater, more chilling intensity. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. The words are almost incomprehensible, an act of spiritual self-cannibalism that defies every teaching of the law you have known since childhood. You take the cup when it is passed to you, the rim still damp from the lips of the disciple next to you, and you drink deeply. The wine, usually a symbol of celebration, now tastes of ceremony and foreboding sacrifice. The entire ritual, this holy, solemn moment, stands in stark contrast to the raw, chaotic energy of your earlier life on the boat. You used to consume rough bread and harsh wine quickly, fueling the labor of the nets. Now, this simple meal is imbued with an eternal weight, transforming your earthly hunger into a need for spiritual sustenance you didn't know you possessed. You feel the wine's immediate warmth spread through your tired limbs, but it cannot penetrate the cold terror beginning to settle around your heart. The holy moment is violently shattered by human malice. The master's eyes sweep slowly over the faces around the table, resting momentarily on each of you, and he speaks the dreadful, low-voiced truth. One of you will betray me. The question hangs in the air, thick and heavy, and the silence that follows is filled with the immediate, panicked murmurs of the others asking, "Is it I, Lord?" You feel a burning rush of indignation. How dare he imply such treason could come from this loyal circle, from the men who left everything to follow him? Yet, the thought of Judas flashes into your mind, sharp and immediate. You glance across the table, watching the dark, calculating stillness in Judas's eyes. You cannot bring yourself to ask the master directly, still paralyzed by the pride that prevents you from seeking the obvious truth. Instead, fueled by wine, shock, and a frantic need for certainty, you turn and begin signaling wildly to John, who is resting close to Jesus, his head almost touching the master's shoulder. You urgently beckon him, gesturing with your head and eyes, urging him to ask who the betrayer is. Your heart is hammering against your ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm that is drowning out the quiet sanctity of the room. You watch John lean in, speak quietly to the master, and receive the answer. You see the slight, almost imperceptible movement as Jesus dips a piece of bread into the dish and hands it to Judas. The meaning is clear, devastating, and immediate. In that instant, the holy ritual of the bread and the wine, the promise of salvation, is directly juxtaposed with the reality of betrayal. The sacred moment is irrevocably shattered by human malice. You watch Judas take the morsel, rise quickly, and move toward the door, disappearing into the dark, silent city. A knot of cold dread tightens in your stomach, replacing the warmth of the wine. You know the storm has officially begun. The immediate shock of Judas's exit leaves a vacuum in the upper room, a silent chasm where fellowship used to be. The moment is so profound, so devastating, that no one dares to speak, allowing the terror of the impending betrayal to settle fully upon the remaining 11. You are still reeling from the shocking intimacy of the bread and wine, the overwhelming humility of the foot washing, and the sudden departure of the traitor. The master, however, is calm, almost transcendent. He speaks not of the betrayal, but of his impending departure and the promise of a new advocate. Yet, the conversation is disjointed, fractured by your exhaustion, the wine, and the suffocating pressure of unaddressed fear. You look at the 10 men around you, the men who have been your life for 3 years, and you see fear and confusion mirrored in every face. Driven by a terrible mix of wounded pride, profound exhaustion, and a sincere but arrogant conviction of your own loyalty, you break the silence. You cannot bear the thought of his leaving. Your love is real, immediate, and fiercely protective, but it is entirely earthly. You interrupt him, fueled by the memory of the rock, the name that demands action. Lord, where are you going? You are ready to follow, ready to fight, ready to stand against the entire Sanhedrin if necessary. He tells you plainly that where he is going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. This simple statement is a fresh insult to your pride. Why must you wait? Why are you being held back? The heat of the argument rises in your chest, and you decide that if everyone else is confused, you must be the strong, unwavering voice. You make your bold, defining declaration, your voice louder than necessary in the quiet room. Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for your sake. The sincerity of the statement is absolute. In that moment, you genuinely believe it. You see the sword in your mind, the desperate charge against the crowd, the glorious martyrdom. Your declaration is not a lie, but a boast, an overestimation of your spiritual resolve when faced with real, crushing danger. The wine has loosened your tongue, and the wounded pride from the betrayal mentioned has made you reckless. The master's gaze, when it settles on you, is calm, infinitely sorrowful, and utterly crushing. His prophecy is delivered without heat, a quiet thunderbolt that strikes directly at the center of your heart, silencing your internal noise immediately. He uses your own words, turning your promise into a prediction of failure. Will you lay down your life for my sake? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. The prophecy is the central, defining dramatic moment of the evening. It is the spiritual death sentence, far worse than any physical execution. It does not condemn you for fleeing or for doubting. It condemns you for the ultimate shame, cowardice, and betrayal of him in his moment of greatest need. The shame is absolute, leaving you feeling physically cold despite the warm air of the room. You sit frozen, the silence of the room returning tenfold, amplified by the terror of the prediction. You immediately deny the prophecy, the denial coming automatically, without thought, like a reflex to a sudden burn. You double down on your loyalty, shouting your insistence that even if all others fall away, you will not. You drag the others into your defense, making their loyalty dependent on yours. But the damage is done. The seed of sickening doubt is planted deep in your soul, flourishing in the soil of your fear. When you finally rise and leave the upper room, you walk with heavy, clumsy steps down the steep, cobbled streets of Jerusalem. The night air is cool and sharp, bringing a sudden, sober clarity that cuts through the heat of the wine. The sounds of the night city, a distant dog barking, a baby crying, the muffled rhythm of a street musician, all seem to be weaving themselves into a mocking chorus. The sound of a crowing rooster, though absent, is deafening in your mind. The denial prophecy echoes, not as a threat, but as an inescapable fact. You glance over your shoulder, terrified of seeing the master's sorrowful gaze again. You walk toward the shadows of Gethsemane, knowing you are marching toward the very test you just promised you would pass, but now feeling the absolute, terrifying certainty that you will fail. The fear is a cold, hard knot settling in your belly. The transition from the upper room's warm, lamp-lit sanctuary to the dense, cool darkness of the olive grove is immediate and jarring. Gethsemane, the name means oil press, is usually a place of quiet, slow labor, but tonight it feels heavy with spiritual dread. The air here, on the slope of the Mount of Olives, is thick with the scent of ancient olive trees, their dark, gnarled trunks like silent, watchful sentinels. The quiet of the garden contrasts sharply with the earlier noise of the city and the agitated arguments of the supper. the Master separates himself, taking you and James and John further into the deep shadows. His face is pale, drawn, and etched with an immense sorrow you have never seen. He asks you to simply watch and pray, to stay awake while he goes a little further to wrestle with his fate. This is a task that should be easy, a final act of simple obedience, but your body fails you immediately. The overwhelming fatigue that has plagued you all week now descends with absolute crushing finality. It is not just physical tiredness from the long walk and the lack of sleep. It is the mental and spiritual exhaustion of bearing the weight of prophecy, the shock of the betrayal, and the crushing shame of your own promised denial. Your brain feels thick and sluggish, unable to resist the pull of oblivion. You settle down near a massive, twisted root, leaning back against the rough bark. The sound of the night in the grove is a monotonous drone. The quiet chirping of crickets, the rustle of dry leaves, the soft, distant murmur of the Master's voice raised in agonizing prayer. These sounds should keep you alert, but they quickly transform into a hypnotic, sleep-inducing rhythm. The heavy, physical pull of sleep is like a vast, dark current dragging you under. You fight it for a while, digging your fingernails into the dust, struggling to keep your eyes open. You know, with agonizing certainty, what your Master is enduring nearby, yet your body betrays you. The desire to simply stop being a disciple, to shed the burdens of the rock for just a few hours, is an overwhelming temptation. The shame of this failure, the failure to keep watch, is almost immediate. You are unable to provide even this most basic comfort to the one who just knelt to wash your feet. He returns, finding you and the others soundly asleep, slumped against the roots. His voice, when he wakes you, is quiet, filled with a sorrowful reproach that cuts deeper than any shout. Could you not keep watch for 1 hour? You stumble awake, ashamed and disoriented, the deep, heavy sleep leaving a sticky residue on your tongue and an ache behind your eyes. You offer no excuse, for there is none. The memory of the rooster, the symbol of your promised failure, rings louder in your ears. He leaves again, returning to his solitary, agonizing prayer. And you fail him again. The physical weariness is too great, the comfort of the rough earth too sweet. You sink back, down, the weight of the previous day's guilt, the shame of failing to stay awake, is instantly replaced by the present reality of your failure. You know you are missing the most important, terrible moment of his spiritual struggle, yet you cannot lift your eyelids. The final time you are roused, it is not by the Master's gentle touch. You wake abruptly, not to the sight of his calm face, but to the jarring, sudden sight of torchlight cutting violent orange paths through the dense olive trees. The sound is immediate and terrifying. The rhythmic, unnatural sound of approaching metal, the clash of weapons, and the low, angry voices of many men. The quiet solitude of the garden is instantly shattered. You leap up, the confusion of sleep giving way to immediate, adrenaline-fueled terror. Your mind struggles to process the sudden, overwhelming transformation from sacred solitude to armed siege. You see the gleaming weapons, the leather armor of the temple guards, and the terrible, unmistakable figure of Judas Iscariot leading them directly to your location. The silence of the night is now filled with the sound of impending violence and betrayal. The olive grove, moments ago, a sanctuary of sleep and prayer, is now a swirling vortex of hostile movement, torchlight, and metallic threat. The shock of being roused from deep sleep immediately collides with the terrifying realization that Judas has led the entire temple guard, perhaps even Roman auxiliaries, right into the heart of your refuge. Your confusion is quickly replaced by a primal, burning rush of adrenaline, the animal instinct to fight back overriding every spiritual command to endure. You see Judas advance quickly toward the master, and the gesture, the cold, calculated kiss, is a visual wound that ignites your anger. This is the moment for action, the moment to prove your earlier boast. I will lay down my life for your sake. You grab the sword, a heavy, familiar weight you have been carrying concealed beneath your cloak, a weapon intended only for defense against highway robbers, and you pull it free. The sudden, adrenaline-fueled choice is made in a split second. You swing the blade recklessly, aiming for a decisive blow, intending to kill the nearest threat and initiate the violent resistance that your pride has always demanded. The noise of the sword slicing through the air is sharp and immediate, a sound of rebellion that rings out across the peaceful garden. You feel the dull, sickening resistance as the blade connects with flesh, but you miss your mark. Instead of a warrior's kill, you achieve a clumsy, bloody accident. You manage only to sever the ear of Malchus, one of the high priest's servants, who had stepped too close. The focus immediately narrows to the physical details. The metallic scent of fresh, warm blood hitting the cold dust of the garden floor, the sharp noise of the sword being pulled back, and the immediate, agonizing scream of the wounded man. The whole thing is messy, embarrassing, and completely ineffective. Your momentary rush of warrior's pride is instantly extinguished by the master's voice. His rebuke is sharp, immediate, and full of sorrow. Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. He touches the servant's wound, healing it instantly, reversing your violent failure with a simple, quiet miracle. Your attempt at being a hero, a valiant protector, fails immediately, exposed as a rash, earthbound act of clumsy violence. You stand frozen, the heavy sword suddenly uselessly heavy in your grip, the reality of your failure burning into your mind. You look at the Master, he who commands legions of angels, willingly allowing himself to be bound by rope and seized by men. You realize that your impulse to fight was not loyalty. It was another form of denial, a rejection of the path of suffering he has repeatedly described. Your sword is not a tool of justice, but a symbol of your refusal to trust divine purpose. The guards and temple police seize Jesus, surrounding him immediately. The other disciples, including James and John, scatter instantly, their fear overwhelming any lingering sense of duty. You watch them melt away into the shadows of the olive trees, seeking the safety of flight. You are left completely alone, holding the dripping sword, the single, visible proof of resistance. The fear that paralyzes you is absolute. You are no longer the loyal rock. You are the clumsy fool who attacked a servant and failed to protect his master. You drop the sword, the metallic clang of it hitting the stone sounding like a final, dreadful punctuation mark in your discipleship. You turn, heart hammering in your chest, and flee into the dense black shadows of the grove, running blindly downhill, away from the torchlight and the sound of the chains. The feeling of absolute, paralyzing terror consumes you as the guards lead the master away. You are leaving him to face injustice alone, consumed by the shame of having blood on your hands and the sword uselessly heavy in the dust. You know that you must follow, drawn by a thread of loyalty, but you can only do so from a distance, hidden by the shadows, terrified of being recognized. You can only follow at a distance, hidden in the shadows, hoping to remain unseen by the men who now lead the master into the city. You run until your lungs burn, and the cold air scrapes raw against your throat. You run not toward safety, but away from the light and the chains, away from the embarrassing, catastrophic failure of your single, rash act of violence. The sword, now abandoned in the dust of the olive grove, represents the final, utter collapse of your promise to stand and fight. You are no longer the rock. You are the terrified fisherman, fleeing from the consequence of his master's obedience. You stumble blindly downhill, guided only by the need to put distance between yourself and the noise of the temple guards. The black shadows of the Mount of Olives engulf you, offering anonymity that feels both welcome and deeply shameful. You realize, through the adrenaline-fueled haze, that you have not run toward Bethany or the safety of the village, but in a parallel path to the road leading back to the city. Your feet, despite your conscious terror, are magnetically drawn to the center of the danger. The city streets are cold and still, wrapped in the deep pre-dawn quiet. You move like a phantom, hugging the walls, your shadow long and distorted under the infrequent torchlight placed high on the corners of buildings. You are consumed by indecision. Should you hide? Should you go back? Should you simply disappear and try to forget the taste of blood and the sound of the master's gentle rebuke? Shame and sheer terror are locked in a painful internal struggle, freezing your will. Then you hear them. The rhythmic tramp of many feet, the low murmur of soldiers' voices, and the distinct, chilling sound of iron chains dragging against the stone pavement. You realize the procession is passing through the street just ahead. Your loyalty, that persistent, agonizing thread that refuses to break, forces you to slow down. You melt into the deep recess of a merchant's doorway, waiting until the main body of the guard passes. You see the master in the center of the group, bound, his head bowed, moving with a resigned patience that breaks your heart. He walks not as a prisoner, but as a man fulfilling a terrible, self-imposed destiny. You follow, emerging from the shadows, maintaining a deliberate and fearful distance. Your pace is uneven, often stumbling, always pausing, always checking behind you for the glint of metal or the sound of following footsteps. The psychological toll of this solitary, fearful journey is immense. You are hyper-vigilant. Every sound in the quiet city, a shutter closing, a stray cat darting across the street, a donkey braying in a stable, making your heart seize up in your chest. The silence of the city is unnerving, amplifying the internal voice of condemnation. You are close enough to see the injustice unfolding, close enough to know that your master is facing his trial alone, yet you are too paralyzed by a cold, selfish fear to intervene. The irony of your name, Cephas, mocks you with every uneven step. The rock is hiding in the darkness, a coward whose only contribution to the crisis was a reckless, failed swing of a weapon. You feel the physical reality of the shame, a tightening in your throat that makes it difficult to swallow, a clammy sweat on your palms, and a low, persistent tremor in your legs. You desperately try to rationalize your inaction, telling yourself you must stay free to organize the others, to tell the tale. But the truth is a bitter, metallic taste. You are afraid to die. The path takes you through the narrow, high-walled alleys of the upper city, the domain of the priests and the wealthy, a world alien and hostile to a Galilean fisherman. Finally, the procession turns into a massive, iron-studded gate, the entrance to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. This is the eye of the storm. The guards pour through the gate, and the master disappears into the stone fortress of institutional power. You hesitate at the corner of the alley, watching the commotion at the gate. Curiosity, that morbid need to witness the end, wars with your overpowering need for self-preservation. You know if you step out of the shadows, you risk everything. But you cannot leave. The burning thread of loyalty, the one that forced you to abandon your flight and follow the procession, now pulls you inexorably toward the high wall. You feel compelled to stay near him, even if only as a silent, paralyzed witness. The final, fateful decision is made not by courage, but by a chilling mix of shame and curiosity. You take a deep, shaky breath, pull your cloak higher over your face, and step out from the shadows of the alley. Your final, fateful steps take you across the narrow, empty street, toward the large wooden door, being held slightly ajar by a handful of servants and guards. The courtyard is now a visible, terrifying cage, and you are stepping into the mouth of the trap, drawn by a mixture of lingering loyalty and the fatal need to know. You slip through the large, iron-studded gate of the high priest's house, propelled by that final, fatal mixture of loyalty and morbid curiosity. The courtyard you enter is a cold, enclosed space, surrounded by high, blank stone walls that seem to press down on the sky. The noise of the street immediately dies, replaced by a tense, quiet atmosphere, thick with the smell of charcoal smoke and the presence of men with weapons. The first thing that strikes you is the cold. The air of the pre-dawn hours is damp and sharp, cutting through your thin cloak. You shiver violently, a movement that feels enormous and clumsy in the charged stillness. Your teeth immediately begin to chatter, betraying your nervousness. The physical need for warmth quickly overrides every other caution. You notice the central charcoal fire, a small, vibrant orange pool of light and heat crackling near the center of the courtyard, surrounded by a tense cluster of guards and servants. You instinctively drift toward the fire, moving slowly, deliberately, trying to affect the casual pace of an indifferent onlooker. You try to mimic the way the guards rest their weight, the way they hold their hands to the heat, but every move feels false. An amateur actor on a deadly stage. The light of the fire is bright and exposes everything. making you feel instantly vulnerable. A shadow casts suddenly into the sun. The guards are rough-looking men, temple police, and household servants, their faces grim and tired. They talk in low, guttural whispers, occasionally punctuated by a nervous cough or a sudden burst of sparks from the charcoal. You settle slightly away from the main group, trying to listen to the sounds emanating from the high, arched windows of the house above, where you know the master is already undergoing interrogation. The voices are muffled, indistinguishable, making the proceedings feel distant and terrifyingly official. The central theme of this space is overwhelming alienation. You are physically present, standing within arm's reach of the fire, your feet firmly planted on the high priest's paved courtyard. Yet, you are spiritually removed, separated from the master, not by walls, but by your own fear and the weight of your unworthiness. You realize that following him to this place was not an act of courage, but merely a geographical fact. Your mind is a painful whirlwind of contrasting images. The gentle scrubbing of the foot washing, the chilling taste of the wine, the shame of the rooster's prophecy, and the sight of your own sword falling uselessly to the dust. All of it leads you here, to this cold, exposed place where your loyalty will be tested not by steel, but by a simple word. You hold your hands out to the fire, savoring the heat that floods your numb fingertips, feeling the painful circulation return. The need for this physical comfort is immediate and absolute, silencing the internal warning of caution. The warmth is a cruel trap, drawing you away from the safety of the dark corners and into the spotlight of accusation. You try to blend in, adopting a look of neutral exhaustion, the look of a man simply waiting for the shift to end. You listen intently to the gossip of the guards, trying to glean any detail about the proceedings above, but the talk is mundane. Complaints about the cold, arguments over a dice game, predictions about dawn. Then the moment arrives. A young woman, a servant girl who tends the door and manages the entry of the night's unwelcome guests, approaches the fire for warmth. She looks at you, not with malice, but with a sudden, dawning recognition. Her expression is casual, entirely non-threatening, yet it is this simple lack of malice that immediately pierces your carefully constructed facade of anonymity. She looks straight into your eyes, her gaze clear and direct, illuminated brightly by the crackling charcoal fire. She smiles slightly, perhaps recognizing a familiar face from the past days of following the master in the city. Her voice is light, soft, and utterly damning. She asks a question that is simple, non-threatening, and yet sets the entire prophecy into motion. You know, with a sudden, sickening clarity, that the test is upon you, and your silence will no longer be an option. The servant girl's question is a simple observation, delivered without accusation or threat. Yet it lands with the force of a physical blow. She looks at your face, illuminated sharply by the flickering light of the charcoal fire, and declares casually, "You also were with Jesus, the Galilean." Her words are like cold water thrown onto the exposed nerve of your fear, instantly piercing the thin veneer of neutrality you had so desperately tried to assume. You feel a physical, agonizing constriction in your throat. Your heart begins to hammer against your ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm that seems loud enough to fill the entire courtyard. You want to deny the very notion that you know him, but the words catch, stuck behind the massive lump of terror. Your voice, when you finally force the sound out, is thin, unnatural, and hesitant. You manage to utter the simple denial, "I do not know what you are talking about." The lie is clumsy, poorly executed, and delivered with a nervous shake that must be obvious to the surrounding guards. But the act is done. The first denial has been spoken, a tiny, irreversible fracture in the foundation of the rock. You immediately feel a rush of shame, followed by an equally strong surge of survival instinct. The rationalization begins instantly. You tell yourself that this strategic silence is necessary to remain free, to watch, to help later. It is a small lie, a technical necessity, nothing like the betrayal of Judas. The fire is the central focus of your sensory experience. The warmth, which initially drew you in, now feels like a spotlight, making you feel entirely exposed and guilty. The crackle of the burning charcoal is loud, dominating the silence, a constant sound of accusation. You stare into the heart of the orange flames, watching the light flicker and dance across the hard faces of the surrounding guards. Their eyes, reflecting the firelight, look like cold, judgmental beads fixed upon you. The smell of the smoke is thick, acrid, and metallic, clinging to your clothes. It is a comforting physical sensation, but it cannot mask the stench of your sudden, unforgivable lie. The guards around the fire have heard the girl's comment and your quick, panicked denial. They are now watching you with greater interest, their expression shifting from bored indifference to calculating suspicion. You try to hold their gaze, to appear casual, but your effort is transparent. The initial fear of the question is now replaced by the chilling fear of being discovered. You try to appear absorbed in the flames, focusing intently on the heat to distract from the cold, sinking dread in your soul. Every shadow seems to hold a judge, and every whisper from the guards sounds like a confirmation of your identity. You feel the physical weight of the lie resting on your shoulders, heavier and more crushing than the weight of your fishing nets. You move your feet slightly, preparing to stand, suddenly desperate to escape the relentless light of the fire. The space feels too small, too contained, and the faces of the guards too probing. You realize the warmth, which you sought for physical comfort, is spiritually dangerous, exposing you to the light of truth and the consequences of your commitment. The girl, satisfied, or perhaps momentarily distracted, moves back toward the entrance gate, and you seize the opportunity. With forced, uneven casualness, you rise to your feet, your limbs stiff and aching from the cold and the tension. You whisper a quiet apology to the master in your heart, a useless plea for forgiveness for the small, necessary lie, and you begin to back away from the fire's damning light. You move toward the cold, deeper shadows near the entrance portico, attempting to escape the probing eyes of the guards and the weight of your own shame. The warmth of the fire stays on your face for a moment, a brief, haunting reminder of your comfort and your cowardice. As you move into the darkness, you feel the prophecy taking hold, tightening its unbreakable grip. You know the danger is not over. It has merely changed locations, shifting from the light to the shadow, where the next accuser waits. You stand under the archway of the entrance portico, moving as far from the dangerous light of the central charcoal fire as possible. The air here is colder, damper, smelling of old stone in the night's chill, a dank perfume of fear and closed-in space. You press yourself against the rough wall, desperate to blend into the deepening shadows, hoping that a change in location might grant you a reprieve from the scrutiny of the guards. Your breathing is shallow and rapid, and your legs tremble slightly, still recovering from the adrenaline of the initial denial. The moments tick by with excruciating slowness, each one a second of borrowed safety that only deepens the eventual shame. You try to appear like a person casually lingering before leaving, an extra, unimportant servant whose presence means nothing. You wrap your cloak tightly around your chest, trying to hide the tremors that shake your body. From the shadows, you can still hear the low murmur of the guards' voices around the fire and the distant, muffled voices from the rooms above, where the master's trial is underway. Sometimes, the low roar of an angry, judicial voice rises in volume, only to be immediately swallowed by the thick stone walls, and you strain your neck, desperate to understand what they are saying, what indignity he is enduring, right above your head. The inability to hear is a torment, fueling your paranoia. Then, you are confronted again. You notice another person, a man this time, a servant who had perhaps stepped out onto the porch to survey the gate or merely escape the crowded fire pit. This man is older, his face lined by long service to the powerful, with sharp, assessing eyes that lack the servant girl's naive curiosity. He looks at you with a deliberate, challenging suspicion that the girl lacked, his gaze calculating your identity against the shadows of the porch. He has perhaps overheard the girl's earlier question and your nervous denial, and he is determined to press the issue and find the truth hiding behind your strained casualness. He questions you directly, his voice low, but carrying a tone of certainty that cuts through the night air. You are one of them. This time, the accusation is more forceful, more definitive, leaving absolutely no room for the kind of hesitant deflection you attempted before. The pressure rises instantly, converting your nervous fear into a surge of desperate, overwhelming panic. You feel the absolute, immediate need to sell the lie completely, to burn the bridge between your true identity as a follower and this false, anonymous persona of a stranger. Survival demands total commitment to the deceit. This second denial is stronger, more definitive, and utterly heartbreaking in its desperation. You don't just deny knowing him. You use an oath, swearing by the most sacred things you know, confirming your lie with a religious formality that is a complete, blasphemous betrayal of your simple Galilean language and your master's teachings against swearing. You curse your own tongue, forcing it to articulate the total, unreserved abandonment of your 3-year commitment. The lie escapes your lips with a shocking finality, sealing your fate with a dark, deliberate conviction, like the sound of a heavy prison door slamming shut. The rapid decay of your moral resolve is sickening. The first denial was a hesitant whisper of self-preservation, a stumble. This second one is a shout of panicked self-betrayal, a desperate leap into darkness. You realize that with every word, the rock is eroding faster, crumbling into dust beneath the immense pressure of fear. The initial rationalization that you were staying to watch, to help, to organize, is now exposed as a terrible, transparent self-deception. You are staying because you are paralyzed, a caged animal, unable to move toward either escape or loyalty, stuck in the freezing purgatory of the porch. The servant man seems satisfied by the sheer force of your denial, or perhaps deterred by the sudden, reckless hostility in your eyes. He shrugs and walks back toward the warmth of the fire, dismissing you as just another frightened peasant. But the damage is done. Your hands, still pressed against the cold stone of the wall, feel dirty, stained by the lie and the worthless oath. You look out through the small, open space of the entrance arch, seeing the dark, empty street beyond the massive wooden gate. The gate, your single point of entry and escape, now looks like a point of no return, guarded by the possibility of immediate recognition. You are utterly trapped. The courtyard, once a large, impressive space, now feels like a small, suffocating cage. You know you cannot go back to the firelight, where the faces are too familiar, and you cannot safely leave through the gate, not after drawing so much suspicion to yourself with your desperate swearing. You are suspended between flight and confrontation, stuck in the freezing shadows, waiting for the inevitable hammer blow of the final confrontation, knowing it is only a matter of minutes until your true identity is exposed. The cold of the stone wall seeps into your bones, a physical manifestation of your growing despair, a cold that reaches into your very soul. The minutes that follow the second denial stretch into an agonizing eternity, each second heavier than the last. You remain fixed in the shadows of the entrance portico, your entire body rigid with the effort of silence, trying desperately to regulate your breathing and control the frantic internal rhythm of your heart. You feel the shame of the previous lie, the curse you uttered, sticking to the roof of your mouth like bitter resin. The prophecy now feels not like a possibility, but a palpable, inevitable fate closing in, y'all. You listen to your own rapid, shallow breathing, convinced that even the sound of your lungs expanding will be enough to betray you. The silence of the city outside the courtyard walls is now a mocking contrast to the deafening panic inside your head. A silence that seems to be waiting only for your final, damning word. You try to pray, but the words turn to ash on your tongue, choked by the memory of your oaths. The final confrontation approaches in the form of a small group of servants and guards who drift toward the porch, perhaps sensing your anxiety, or perhaps drawn by the previous commotion and a growing suspicion. Among them is a man whose face sends a jolt of icy terror through your veins. He is clearly related to Malchus, the servant whose ear you severed in the garden, his gaze possessing a focused, personal hostility the others lacked. He looks at you with a cold, clear scrutiny, his eyes narrowed with not just suspicion, but recognition of the man who wielded the sword. The accuser points a firm, accusing finger directly at your chest, and his voice is loud, carrying across the courtyard with the clarity of a judge's pronouncement. It is an indictment based not on sight, but on sound, on the fundamental rhythm of your entire life. Surely you are one of them, for your accent betrays you, and your speech makes it known that you are a Galilean. This simple, undeniable linguistic fact is the final, fatal piece of proof, a betrayal from the very sound of your being. Your identity, the way you inflect your words and pronounce your vowels, is your downfall. The words you use every day, the soft, distinctive sounds and hard consonants of the Galilean dialect, are now the unassailable proof of your guilt. You suddenly hate the sound of your own voice, the familiar cadence that links you irrevocably to the master in the northern province. The truth is in your mouth, and you cannot stop it from coming out. You panic completely, the crushing weight of the prediction, and the sudden, terrifying certainty of discovery breaking your final shred of composure. The shame is now absolute, compounded by the fact that the accuser is connected to the very man you injured. You erupt in a panicked, emotional swearing, using the kind of coarse, guttural language you used to hear on the docks of Capernaum. Oaths and curses that are a complete, deliberate abandonment of the Master's holiness. You deny the charge vehemently, furiously, screaming that you do not know the man they speak of. The denial is loud, desperate, and utterly false. A performance of self-preservation so raw and intense that the very act of speaking burns your throat and stings your eyes with tears of shame. You are shouting the lie, trying to overpower the truth with sheer volume and violence of language. You are betraying your master with the tongue he taught you to use for prayer and confession. In the midst of this panicked, emotional outburst, as the final, terrible word of denial leaves your lips, a sound cuts through the pre-dawn stillness. It is the sudden, sharp, brazen call of a rooster crowing, ringing out from a nearby roof or stable. It is a raw, physical sound, but in that moment, it possesses a chilling, biblical finality, cutting through the entire night's tension like a blade. The sound is immense, shattering the stillness and signaling the completion of the prophecy. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times, and you have. The sound rings 3 times in your head. The first hesitant denial, the second forceful rejection, and the final panicked scream of abandonment. You freeze instantly, the sound of the cock's crow wiping the curse from your tongue. At that precise moment, through the high, arched window of the inner hall above, you see a brief, fleeting movement. The master, being led from one room to another by the temple guards, turns his head. His gaze, distant but clear, sweeps down across the courtyard, finding you, the rock, standing in the shadows, your face stained with tears and betrayal. His look is not one of anger or condemnation, but of deep, immense, knowing sorrow. It is a look that contains the entirety of the last 3 years, the foot washing, the prophecy, and your complete, utter failure. That silent, sorrowful gaze is the final, agonizing blow. You turn instantly, a gut-wrenching cry of profound despair tearing from your chest, and you run blindly out of the courtyard and into the silent, unforgiving streets of Jerusalem. Your entire world reduced to the sound of a crowing cock and the memory of a sorrowful look. The final, panicked scream of denial is still hanging in the air when the sound arrives. the raw, grating, utterly definitive crow of the rooster. It cuts through the tension with a physical sharpness, a sound of biblical finality. The sound is immense, shattering the stillness, signaling the completion of the prophecy that had been whispered in the warmth of the upper room just hours before. The world slows down to a crawl. The voices of the guards and the accusers instantly recede, fading into a dull, meaningless hum, leaving only the ringing echo of the rooster and the cold silence of shame. In that exact, agonizing instant, you lift your eyes, your face contorted and wet with the sudden, overwhelming wave of self-loathing. Your gaze is drawn, as if by an invisible, unbreakable thread, to the high, arched window of the inner hall. At that very moment, the Master is being led out, moved from the initial trial before Annas to the house of Caiaphas. The temple guards push him roughly, their hands gripping the ropes, their movements brisk and uncaring. As they pass the window, his head turns. It is a slight, deliberate movement, a final, quiet act of attention. His eyes, distant but clear, sweep down across the courtyard, finding you, the rock, standing in the shadows of the portico, your entire body trembling, your face stained with the fresh tears of betrayal. Their eyes meet. The moment is profound, silent, and devastating. In his gaze, there is no anger, no flash of fury, no sign of condemnation for your failure. Instead, there is a profound, sorrowful love that pierces your soul far deeper than any whip or sword ever could. His eyes are wells of immense pity, not for himself, who is bound and facing death, but for you, who has just destroyed his own soul with 3 hasty, cowardly lies. The look is entirely knowing, acknowledging the prediction, the foot washing, and the terrible, irreversible reality of your complete failure. In the fraction of a second their eyes hold, the entirety of your 3 years of discipleship rushes back. The call beside the Sea of Galilee, the walking on the water, the confession that he was the Christ, the Son of the living God. The memory of the prophecy, so casually dismissed hours earlier, now screams in your mind, a clear, horrifying sound that drowns out the rooster's echo. The words come back not as a warning, but as a judgment rendered. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Your world shatters. The sturdy image of Peter, the fisherman, the leader, the rock, is obliterated, replaced by Simon, the frightened, cursing, and utterly broken coward. The look of sorrowful love in the Master's eyes confirms your identity not as the faithful apostle, but as the weakest of his followers, the one who failed the first real test of loyalty. The profound sadness you see is less about his pain and more about your loss of courage. The sound of the guards pulling him along breaks the spell. The Master's face is gone from the window, pulled out of sight toward the next stage of his ordeal. You are left alone, standing in the cold, damp shadows, the immense love of his gaze having scalded your soul. The sorrow you feel is not merely remorse for a mistake. It is the crushing realization that you have betrayed the only man who ever truly loved and believed in you. The pain is physical, a wrenching, gut-driven agony that you cannot contain. A choking sob tears from your chest, an involuntary cry of profound despair. You turn instantly, frenzied by the need to escape the scene of your crime and the memory of that sorrowful look. You must flee the courtyard, the guards, the silent accusation of the cold stone walls. You push past the small group of lingering servants, stumbling blindly toward the iron-studded gate. Your frantic physical retreat is a desperate attempt to outrun the sound of the rooster and the image of those eyes. You bolt out onto the silent, cold streets of Jerusalem, running without direction, the city swallowed by absolute darkness just before the dawn. You run until the air is ragged in your throat, until your legs give out, driven only by the agonizing need to find a solitary place where your guilt and shame can finally collapse unchecked. You run from the courtyard with a speed born not of strength, but of desperation. The immense, sorrowful love in the Master's gaze burns into your vision, turning the dark streets of Jerusalem into a terrifying, flashing canvas of shame. You run until your chest feels as if it will split open, until the cold stone and high walls blur into a single, suffocating tunnel. You don't know where you are going. You only know you must be away from the place of betrayal, away from the sound of the guards and the memory of the crowing cock. Finally, your legs give out. You collapse against a rough, cold stone wall in a deserted alleyway, miles from the bustling house of Caiaphas. The air is still freezing, damp with the pre-dawn mist, and the rough stone scrapes against your cheek as you sink down into the dust and dirt. You are Simon, the failed fisherman, reduced to a huddled, shuddering mess in the anonymity of the shadows. The moment of flight ends, and the overwhelming grief and self-loathing descend upon you with a crushing finality. The scripture says you wept bitterly, and the reality is worse than any mere weeping. Your body is taken over by uncontrollable sobs, violent spasms that shake your frame and tear through the quiet of the alley. The sound is ugly, raw, and completely animalistic, a noise of total spiritual collapse. You bury your face in your cloak, trying to muffle the sound, ashamed that even in this solitude, your despair is so loud. The sensory details of this utter brokenness are acute. The cold, gritty texture of the dusty street against your hands, the rough wool of your cloak soaked with tears and snot, the agonizing cramps in your chest from the force of your uncontrolled sobbing. You grasp at the dirt, clutching handfuls of cold, dead earth, wishing you could bury yourself entirely within it. The air is heavy, thick with the smell of sewage and despair, a fitting environment for your failure. The psychological pain is a knife twist of realization. The self-image of the rock is completely obliterated. The Peter who boasted of dying for the Master, the man who walked on water, the man who vowed never to fall, he is gone. He was a lie, a facade built on arrogance and pride. All that remains is Simon, the fearful Galilean, whose voice was just used to abandon the one man who saw potential in his clumsy, boastful heart. You remember the warmth of the upper room, the cool, dusty water on your feet, and the gentle touch of the Master's hands. The act of humble service now mocks your subsequent betrayal. He knelt before you, and you repaid that ultimate act of love with 3 lies to save your own skin. The guilt is an unbearable physical weight, pressing the breath out of your lungs. You wish the guards had seized you instead. Wished you had died in the garden. Wished you had never spoken the vows you could not keep. Hours seem to pass in this state of total desolation. The cold seeps into your bones, numbing your extremities, but the fire of shame burns perpetually in your gut. You are separated from your master by your own cowardice, and the knowledge is worse than death. You are no longer one of the chosen, but an outcast, a proven traitor who failed the fundamental test of loyalty. The tears eventually slow, leaving you hollowed out, physically and emotionally drained. A slow, terrifying numbness begins to set in, replacing the acute pain with a vast, empty space. The first cold gray light of dawn begins to filter down the alley, washing over the dark stone. This is not the joyous dawn you had imagined, the dawn of the kingdom. This is the dawn of the darkest day in history, and you are entirely alone, separated from the one light you ever had. The slow, numbing realization is that you must now face the day. You are free, alive, and utterly adrift. A boat without a sail or rudder on a sea of crushing guilt. You stand slowly, your body stiff and aching, the physical manifestation of your broken spirit. The cold light of the morning shows you the dirt and tears on your cloak, a badge of your survival and your shame. You are alone, and the knowledge forces you to turn not toward the temple or the city, but toward the hiding place where you must face the others. The slow, agonizing creep of the day that follows, the day they call the preparation, the day of crucifixion, is a blur of gray terror. You find your way, instinctively, back to the small, cramped house where the remaining disciples and some women have gathered. The atmosphere inside is one of complete, stunned paralysis, a tight compression of fear and despair that makes the very air difficult to breathe. You hide deep in the shadows of the room, unable to meet anyone's gaze, least of all John's, who saw the look of recognition in the courtyard. Your mind is dominated by utter emptiness and guilt, a silent internal scream that drowns out the hushed, fearful whispers of the others. You sit motionless, the raw, physical pain of the night's weeping replaced by a heavy, paralyzing numbness. Your thoughts turn relentlessly to the imagery of your fisherman past, the only life you ever truly knew. Your life now feels like a net hauled back from the sea, heavy with the weight of expectation, yet utterly empty of fish. The nets are clean, but useless. They failed to hold anything of value. That is your life. Empty nets, clean only by betrayal. You struggle constantly with the shame of survival. You, the boaster, the man who promised to lay down his life, are hiding behind locked doors while he is out there, enduring the unspeakable. The terrible conviction sets in that you should be there, on the cross beside him, or at least fighting in the crowd. Anything but this quiet, comfortable shame. The thought of physical pain is preferable to this crushing spiritual agony. You are alive only because you denied him, and that survival is a poison in your soul. The day drags by with impossible slowness. You hear the city's activity, the heavy tramp of feet, the shouting of Roman soldiers, the distant, rising murmur of a gathering crowd. You know, with agonizing certainty, what those sounds mean. They are the muffled sounds of the crucifixion coming from the distance, the terrible crescendo of the inevitable. Each distant shout, each roll of a wooden cart is a fresh stab of guilt, a reminder of the sacrifice you refuse to share. You remain rooted to the spot, consuming nothing, your stomach twisted into a hard, painful knot. You are unable to move, consumed by paralyzing regret. John, occasionally leaving and returning with news, moves with a purposeful sorrow that highlights your own inaction. You are a silent, useless observer, a shadow in the room, unable to offer comfort, unable to seek it. You feel like a ghost among the living, a man who spiritually died with the sound of the rooster. The theme of emptiness pervades every corner of your perception. The promise of the kingdom, the glory you anticipated, the power you believed in, all of it is gone, dissolved into dust and fear. You look at your hands, the rough, scarred hands that once gripped the tiller of your boat and shook the nets, the hands that briefly gripped a sword and spilled blood. They are now idle, useless, resting heavily in your lap, symbolizing the complete and total failure of your vocation. The day reaches its agonizing peak. The distant city noise intensifies into a terrible wave of sound, the sound of the hammers, the desperate cries of suffering, and then, suddenly, a final, thunderous shout that seems to shake the very foundations of the house. A terrible, profound darkness descends over the city, a physical manifestation of the divine agony. Then, the terrifying quiet descends. It is a silence that is far heavier and more complete than any sound that preceded it. It is not the quiet of rest, but the stillness of finality, the sound of the world ending. The muffled, heavy sounds of the crucifixion cease completely. The silence settles, thick and absolute, confirming the finality of the tragedy. He is gone. You realize, with a devastating clarity, that this absolute quiet is the sound of your hope being extinguished, leaving you with nothing but the empty nets of your life. The terrifying quiet that followed the final moment of the crucifixion hangs over the small, cramped hiding place like a physical shroud. The immediate aftermath of the burial is dominated by confusion and a crushing, pervasive fear that chills the blood far more effectively than the night air. You are physically present, sharing the small room with the remaining core of the disciples and the faithful women who had followed him. But you are emotionally absent, a hollow shell of your former self, a breathing monument to failure. You sit rigidly, slightly apart from the small circle of comfort, the self-appointed pariah of the group, a silent outcast who failed publicly and now hides in shame. The room is tight and uncomfortable, barely large enough for the 12 who once followed, now less than that. The windows are shuttered tightly against the possibility of discovery, forcing everyone to exist in a murky, hushed interior that feels less like a safe house and more like a tomb already. The air is stale, thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, the lingering, metallic tang of fear, and the recent tears that still sting your own eyelids. The conversations are fragmented, low whispers that circle endlessly around the same terrible, unanswerable points. What happens now? Are we next? Will they pursue us? Where is Judas? The group's hope has not merely been disappointed or deferred, it has been violently disintegrated, leaving behind nothing but the rubble of unmet expectations and the crushing certainty of defeat. You listen to the hushed, fearful debates, the attempts to rationalize this catastrophe, to recall prophecy, and to find some tiny scrap of meaning in the horror. The crushing weight of the past weeks, the triumphal entry, and the subsequent crash settles heavily upon you. You are completely unable to lead or offer comfort. Your failure in the courtyard has stripped you of all authority, all moral standing. The shame is a leaden cloak wrapped around your voice, stifling every word. When the others look at you, you imagine they see the coward, the oath breaker, the man who failed the master at the critical moment, the living proof of the prophecy. You are a silent outcast, even among your friends, and the silence you impose on yourself is a desperate, self-inflicted penance. The dynamic of the fellowship has utterly dissolved. James and John, though grief-stricken and confused, possess a clean, simple sorrow, the honest pain of devastating loss. They are still disciples, mourning their teacher. Your sorrow is complex, contaminated by the personal poison of shame and unforgivable guilt. You are consumed by the feeling that you don't belong here, that you should be outside, mourning alone in the dust, or better yet, suffering the fate you deserved on a cross. The survival you clung to is now the source of your deepest agony. The space feels smaller with every passing minute, the walls seeming to press inward. You watch the women, Mary, Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, their grief deep and genuine, yet somehow more focused, already turning their thoughts to the practicalities of anointing the body after the Sabbath. Their quiet, purposeful devotion, their immediate return to service even in the face of death, highlights the utter uselessness of the men who are reduced to hiding, whispering, and arguing over theology they no longer believe. The memories of the past 3 years, the shared meals, the ecstatic crowds, the miracles, the private lessons, the intimate late-night talks, now flood back, corrupted by the inescapable filter of your betrayal. Every time you recall a moment of pure light, the shadow of the rooster's crow descends upon it, blotting out the warmth. The vision of the breaking of the bread now tastes of ash in your memory, and the glory of the transfiguration is obscured by the raw, flickering shame of the high priest's firelight. The collective fear is palpable, radiating from every corner of the room. Every heavy footfall outside the door, every sudden, distant noise in the street sends a jolt of terror through the room. They are afraid of the Romans, of the Sanhedrin, of the vengeful mob they imagine will soon come for the rest of the Master's followers. You are afraid of yourself, of the man you discovered you were in the courtyard, weak, selfish, and faithless. Your fear is deeper, internal, and far more corrosive, a spiritual sickness that burns from within. The day slowly gives way to evening, and the oppressive, inescapable reality of the Sabbath begins to settle in. The women prepare meager food for the body's need, but you cannot eat. The thought of consuming anything, of finding comfort, feels like a further act of betrayal you do not deserve. The long, terrifying passage of Saturday approaches, the Sabbath of silence, where every moment will be an agonizing wait, a day without action, without noise, without hope, defined entirely by reflection and the relentless recurrence of the Master's sorrowful gaze. The Sabbath descends upon the hiding place with an oppressive, absolute stillness. It is the day the Master rests in the tomb, and by cruel coincidence, the day you are trapped in the suffocating silence of your own despair. The darkness of the previous night has given way to the deep, heavy quiet of a Jewish Sabbath. But this quiet is not restorative. It is punitive. The stone-cold silence magnifies every sound. The scrape of a foot on the stone floor, a muffled cough from a corner, the rhythmic drip of water from a hidden basin. All of it is amplified by the sheer, unremitting internal noise of your guilt. You are confined within the small, shuttered room, trying to respect the sanctity of the day, but every ritual feels empty. Every attempt at prayer choked by the raw, metallic memory of your oaths. The atmosphere is dense, still, and heavy, like the thick, suffocating effects of a terrible smog, pressing down on your chest and making every breath an effort, every movement a leaden chore. You sit in a perpetual state of tension, unable to find rest, unable to find peace, simply waiting for the silence to break or your spirit to fracture. The physical symptoms of your guilt are relentless, a testament to the war waging inside you. You are unable to eat. The idea of nourishment is repugnant when the bread of life is in the earth and you are starved of grace. You try to sleep, curling up miserably in a corner, but your rest is restless and brief, filled with nightmarish, flashing images of the courtyard, the searing heat of the fire, and the accusing faces. Every single time your mind threatens to drift into the oblivion of sleep, the sharp, final, definitive sound of the rooster's crow rips through the attempted silence, yanking you violently back to the unyielding reality of your failure. This long passage of Saturday is the script's deepest dive into your inner turmoil, the agonizing period of reckoning that follows the act of betrayal. You spend the hours staring at the cracks in the ceiling, tracking the slow, imperceptible movement of the light filtering through the shutters. You review every minute of the previous night, replaying the sequence of events over and over, desperately searching for the one moment you could have chosen differently, the single word you could have withheld. There was the moment in the garden, the failure of the clumsy sword, the moment at the fire, the hesitant first denial, and the moment at the porch, the final, screaming curse. Each memory is a fresh, internal laceration that reopens the wound of shame. You feel a profound and terrifying separation from God and from the community. The Sabbath, a day of holy communion and rest, is for you a day of absolute spiritual isolation. You are fully aware that you are the living antithesis of the Sabbath rest, your soul racked with turbulence and self-condemnation. The weight of your original name, Simon Bar Jonah, son of John, is crushing you. You realize you are no longer Peter, the rock, but merely Simon, defined only by his instability and failure to endure the slightest heat. The others in the room move slowly, speaking only in soft necessity, observing the law with a mechanical, somber devotion. But you see the same shadow in their eyes, the end of all expectation, the complete collapse of their faith in a conquering Messiah. They mourn a dead leader and a failed hope. You mourn a betrayed friend and the death of your own soul. The difference is a chasm you cannot bridge, a unique burden of guilt that sets you apart. The quiet weeping of the women seems almost dignified compared to your silent internal screaming. The day passes into evening with agonizing slowness, the light fading with heavy finality. The faint smell of cooking spices from the neighboring houses, Sabbath duties completed, is a cruel reminder of the world carrying on, oblivious to the divine catastrophe that has swallowed your life. You pray, but the prayers are not for resurrection, which seems an impossible fantasy reserved only for the gods of myth, but for forgiveness, a mercy you feel you will never, ever deserve. You yearn for action, for the chance to fight, to run, to do anything to escape the unbearable immobility of this crushing quiet. Finally, after what feels like a lifetime of agonizing silence, the day begins its inevitable turn. The deep, heavy black of the night yields to the first, almost imperceptible hint of morning light filtering through the crack of the shutter. The oppressive Sabbath is at an end. The silence has broken, replaced by the faint, distant sounds of the city beginning to stir. A vendor's call, the creak of a wheel, the sound of life resuming. You rise, stiff and aching, your whole body a map of pain. The dawning realization hitting you with a mix of terror and obligation. The tomb is still sealed, but the day of action has returned. The women begin to move, preparing their spices, and you know the world is about to change, though you have no idea if it will change for the better or for the final. Absolute worse. The dawn of the first day of the week filters into the hiding place, heavy with the dust of the end of the Sabbath. A day that feels colder and starker than any day before. You are sitting in the same corner, stiff and aching, the memory of the rooster's crow still sharp in the core of your being. The atmosphere in the room is one of hushed, exhausted despair, the kind of silence that precedes an irreversible fracture. You are simply waiting, not for a miracle, but for the next inevitable wave of persecution to strike. The silence is violently shattered by a sudden, frantic noise at the door, a desperate pounding followed by breathless, high-pitched voices. It is the women, Mary Magdalene and the others, returning from the tomb. They burst into the small room, their faces pale with shock, their shawls askew, their carefully prepared spices abandoned in their hands. They are speaking too quickly, all at once, their words tumbling out in a chaotic, unbelievable torrent that defies all logic and reason. "The stone is rolled away," one cries, her voice thin with terror. "The tomb is empty," shrieks another. "And there were angels shining like lightning who said he is alive." Mary Magdalene, her eyes wide and staring, grabs your arm, her grip desperate and bone deep, repeating the words like an incantation. "They have taken him. The tomb is empty. He is not there." The suddenness and the sheer, chaotic, unbelievable nature of their report strike you with a confusing mixture of emotions. The initial flicker is not one of hope, but of suspicion. A stubborn pragmatism, born from the too much pain and the 3 days of spiritual agony, immediately asserts itself. Angels? Risen? Your mind, the mind of a skeptical fisherman who deals only in cold, tangible truths, like the weight of a net and the roughness of the rope, rejects the fantastical story out of hand. Your reaction is blunt, pragmatic, and heavily colored by your own guilt. You question their story, your voice rough from disuse, demanding logical details. You see their report not as divine revelation, but as the hysterical imaginings of grief-stricken women. You have witnessed 3 days of shattering reality, arrest, trial, death, and you refuse to be fooled by a mere hallucination of hope. You have betrayed the Master and seen him die. Surely, this cannot be a clumsy joke. You remember the Master's promise of resurrection, but it was one of the many things that dissolved under the pressure of the Roman soldiers and the high priest's anger. You turn to the other disciples. The younger men, like John, listen with a mixture of confusion and mounting excitement, a dangerous, fragile hope beginning to stir in their eyes. But the others, the older, more grounded men, look skeptical, nodding along with your own internal dismissal. The guards, the seal, the solid rock of the tomb. The evidence of death was too strong, too final. Yet, despite your stubborn pragmatism, the possibility, however remote, has been spoken aloud. The word empty rings in the room, cutting through the dense air of despair. A deep, agonizing flicker of the old Peter, the man of action, the man who acted first and thought later, is suddenly stirred, fighting against the crushing weight of Simon's shame. If the tomb is truly empty, then something monstrously wrong has occurred, be it theft or miracle. Either way, silence and inaction are no longer possible. The necessity of truth outweighs the certainty of death. You must see it with your own eyes. You must touch the cold stone and confirm the emptiness. If the body is stolen, it is a final desecration that must be answered. If it is a miracle, it is a truth that demands the immediate, desperate commitment you failed to give in the courtyard. The decision is sudden, shared, and entirely instinctive, bypassing all rational debate. You look at John, whose young face is already pale with a terrifying hope, and you both turn toward the door simultaneously. The women's frantic words and wild gestures have done their work. Without a word, you burst out of the house and onto the street. The heavy, muscular legs of the fisherman, accustomed to bracing against the deck of a boat in a Galilean storm, begin to move with a speed fueled by 3 days of bottled-up panic and guilt. The transition is complete. A sudden, shared decision to run to the tomb, a race against John, an instinctive physical response to the last, desperate possibility of a miracle. You are running not toward the Master, but toward the physical site of his death, driven by the frantic need to prove the women wrong, yet terrified that you might prove them right. The burst from the hiding place is a desperate, chaotic release of pent-up energy. You are running toward the tomb, but you are also running from the shame that has crippled you for 3 days. Your heavy, muscular legs, accustomed to the slow, powerful stride of hauling nets or trekking mountain paths drive you forward with a furious, clumsy momentum. This chapter is a highly physical, sensory account of pure speed and desperation. You are instantly engaged in a race against John, the beloved disciple. He is younger, leaner, possessing the graceful, effortless speed of youth, while your own pace is a rugged, powerful, but ultimately less efficient burst of energy. You hear your own heavy breathing, ragged and loud, sawing in your throat, a sharp contrast to the lighter footfalls of John just ahead of you. The morning air, cold and still, tinged with the dampness of the pre-dawn, burns in your lungs, but the internal fire of your guilt is far hotter, propelling you forward. The path beneath your sandals is rough and uneven, cold, hard-packed earth interspersed with sharp, loose stones that threaten to twist your ankle with every frantic step. You feel the physical pain of this sudden, violent exertion, the strain in your calves, the throbbing in your temples, the stitch in your side. Every agonizing stride is a form of desperate penance, a clumsy attempt to run toward an answer that might redeem your soul. You curse your heavy Galilean body, built for endurance on the water, not for this frantic, breathless sprint through the waking streets of Jerusalem. John, fleet and swift, opens a small gap between you. You see his cloak fluttering ahead, a beacon of youth and untainted hope. You know he will reach the tomb first, but you cannot slow your pace. You are running not just to see, but to exhaust the unbearable pressure of the last 72 hours. Finally, you reach the garden, the place of burial. John, having arrived first, hesitates, stooping to peer into the dark, carved opening of the tomb, his youthful reverence holding him back. But your own pragmatic, action-driven nature, combined with the desperate urgency of your emotional need, overcomes any sense of reverence or fear. You do not pause, do not peer. You simply push past him and plunge headlong into the small, oppressive darkness of the burial chamber. The cool, dry air inside the tomb is instantly recognizable. Your eyes adjust rapidly, and the true, breathtaking sight is revealed. The tomb is empty, utterly, unequivocally empty. The stone slab where the master's body had been laid is bare, but the core moment is the discovery of the linen cloths. They are not scattered in chaos, as would be the case if the body had been stolen by thieves or moved in haste. Instead, the linen burial cloths are lying neatly folded and separate. The shroud itself, which had bound the body, is not unraveled, but is simply deflated, resting flat on the stone, keeping the precise shape of the key body it once encased, as if the master had simply passed right through it. The cloth that had been wrapped around his head is folded and set apart, resting by itself. This neatness, this inexplicable sign of order and deliberate arrangement, hits you with a clarity that the women's story of angels could never achieve. The tangible, material ephemeral evidence of the orderly, unhurried departure breaks through the wall of your despair and suspicion. It is not theft. Thieves would not take the time to fold the cloths. It is not hysteria. The cloths are real, resting right there. It is something else entirely, something beyond the cold reality of fishing boats and betrayal. You stand alone in the empty tomb, the air heavy with the scent of spices that linger even though the body is gone. You are surrounded by the physical proof of the impossible. The profound awe and confusion descend upon you, replacing the agony of your guilt with a terrifying, absolute wonder. The pragmatic fisherman who deals in cold facts is confronted by a reality that has no explanation, no logic. Yet the evidence is right there. Neat, folded, and utterly convincing. You are starting to believe the impossible, and the sudden influx of shattering hope is almost as painful as the despair it replaces. You stand motionless, your breath held, witnessing the quiet beginning of a new world. The days that follow the empty tomb are filled with glimpses, rumors, and the overwhelming confusion of a world turned upside down. But the sightings are fleeting, and the confusion lingers. Desperate for the familiar, for the grounded reality of a life that made sense, you return north to Galilee, to the only place you ever truly felt like yourself. You are seeking not glory, but labor, the hard, honest work that might scour the shame from your hands. The familiar scent of the Sea of Galilee hits you immediately, a welcome perfume of brine, wet nets, and cold, clean water. It is a world of tangible truths, a stark contrast to the illusions and betrayals of Jerusalem. You and the others have returned to fishing, a symbolic act that highlights your feeling of ultimate failure. You are back where you started, having traded 3 years of discipleship and hope for nothing but a pile of empty nets and an empty tomb. The night is cold and dark, the moon hidden by clouds. You work the water, casting and hauling the nets, your muscles moving with the practice rhythm of 2 decades, but the nets come back consistently empty. The weight of the nets is familiar, but the lack of resistance, the lack of fish, mirrors the barrenness of your soul. Your heart is heavy, weighed down by the unspoken guilt that still separates you from the others. You are Simon, the failed fisherman, laboring fruitlessly on the cold, indifferent water. As the morning light begins to streak the eastern sky, painting the horizon in hues of cold gray and fragile rose, you see a solitary figure standing on the shore, silhouetted against the nascent light. He calls out across the water, a familiar, clear voice. "Friends, have you caught any fish?" You instinctively answer with the bitter, defeated truth of the night. No. He then tells you to cast the net on the right side of the boat. The command is so ordinary, so reminiscent of that first, impossible miracle that called you from your boat 3 years ago, that a tremor runs through you. You cast the net, and the result is immediate and overwhelming. The nets instantly fill with a multitude of fish, a sudden, immense weight that threatens to split the rope and sink the small boat. It is a heavy, living, miraculous resistance that leaves you gasping. The central moment arrives as John, who is quick to see beyond the physical, whispers the recognition that freezes your blood. It is the Master. The reaction is not rational, not cautious, but pure, unadulterated Peter. You do not wait for the boat to reach the shore. You do not think of the cold or the distance. You wrap your fisherman's cloak tightly around your waist, a hurried, instinctive act of modesty, and, with a powerful, impulsive shove, you leap out of the boat and into the cold, chest-deep water. You churn toward the shore, driven by a desperate, agonizing need to reach him, to apologize, to kneel, to be forgiven. You stumble onto the beach, dripping and breathless, and find him calmly tending a small charcoal fire. The smell of wood smoke and cooking fish, a homely, comforting contrast to the cold sea air. After the simple meal, the moment of profound reckoning finally comes, enacted directly over the simple, familiar sound of the crackling charcoal fire, a terrifying reminder of the fire in the courtyard where you denied him. The master looks at you with his calm, sorrowful, and endlessly loving gaze and asks, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He asks the question 3 times, a direct, measured, and merciful reversal of your 3 denials. The first time, you are choked with tears, but you answer honestly. The second time, the question cuts deeper, forcing you to confront the sincerity of your heart. The third time, the repetition hurts, not because he doubts you, but because he forces you to confront the pain you caused him and the profound sorrow of your own human weakness. Each response of "Yes, Master, you know that I love you," is a weight lifted from your soul. The burden of guilt, the shame of the courtyard, and the agony of the rooster's crow, all of it is dissolved by the steady, calm light of his gaze. Your identity is reestablished not by your strength, but by your love. The transition is complete with the final, clear, unequivocal commission: "Feed my sheep, follow me." The words reestablish your purpose, setting the stage for a new future, a fisherman given a final, greater cast. The 2 years that follow the breakfast on the Galilean shore are defined by a singular, breathtaking transformation. The small, fearful man who wept bitterly in the cold alley is gone, replaced by the man the master named. You are finally, truly, Peter, the rock, but a rock weathered by the relentless erosion of the sea and tempered by the intense, purifying fire of failure. Your identity is no longer based on boastful ambition, but on the quiet, absolute certainty of forgiveness. This final chapter steps fully into the future, offering a view of your enduring survival and the inevitable legacy that flows from total restoration. You are no longer hiding in cramped, shuttered rooms in fear of a sudden knock. You are standing boldly in Jerusalem, in the very temple courts, Solomon's portico, where just weeks earlier you had been a terrified, anonymous figure, easily intimidated by a servant girl. You are preaching to thousands on the day of Pentecost, your voice ringing out with a startling strength and clarity, an authority you never possessed even in your most boastful days. The theme is complete restoration, the profound truth that human weakness, when yielded to grace, can be transformed into unstoppable spiritual strength. The contrast with the fear of the courtyard is absolute and immediate. You stand before the same Sanhedrin that condemned the master, yet your spirit is unbowed. When they demand your silence, threatening imprisonment and death, you answer them with the fierce, unwavering conviction of a man who knows the truth of the resurrection not as a rumor, but as the core reality of the universe. We must obey God rather than men. This is the new Peter, a figure of simple, absolute courage, his bravery forged not in the fleeting heat of initial enthusiasm, but in the purifying crucible of his own catastrophic failure. The memory of the cock's crow now serves as the anchor of his humility, not the chain of his shame. You perform miracles, but not with the effortless, flowing grace of the Master. Your miracles are direct, often clumsy, and utterly dependent on the name of the one you serve. You heal the lame man at the beautiful gate. Your words, a simple, undeniable statement of the Master's power, utterly devoid of self-glory. Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have give I thee. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. You speak not of philosophy or complex theology, but of what you have seen, what you have touched, and what you have so painfully betrayed. Your sermons are powerful because they are born of total forgiveness, a transformation so profound it is visible in the deepening crow's feet around your eyes and the unwavering, direct honesty of your gaze. The final image of your life is one of enduring survival, a peaceful resolution to the chaos of the night of betrayal and the agony of Good Friday. Years pass. The ministry grows, spreading from Jerusalem to Antioch and Rome. You travel vast distances, no longer rowing a fishing boat, but sailing across turbulent seas, carrying the simple, essential message of hope to the edges of the known world. You are the leader of the apostles, but you lead not with arrogance, but with the humble, internalized memory of the rooster's crow forever echoing in the quiet chambers of your heart. That sound is no longer a condemnation. It is a constant, quiet reminder of grace, a spiritual anchor that keeps your pride securely in check. You are the rock who stumbled dramatically, fell completely, and was raised not by his own strength or effort, but by a love so complete it sought him out on a cold beach and forgave the unforgivable. Your legacy is the church, a fellowship built on the profound reality that human failure is not final, and that second chances are the heart of the divine order. You survive not by being stronger or wiser than others, but simply by admitting your weakness and accepting the quiet, persistent call to follow. The narrative settles finally on a note of gentle, eternal peace. The clamor of the Victorian city, the fog, the grime, the desperate struggle for survival, the cacophony of fear and ambition that defined the London streets fades entirely into the distance, yielding to the deep, absolute stillness of the Galilean night sky. The stars wheel in ancient, predictable patterns above the silent, dark water of the sea. Your memory, the memory of Peter, is one of enduring, quiet faith, of a man who learned the cost of everything and found the value of grace. The long journey through the darkness of denial and the silence of the tomb has ended in a certainty that transcends death and time. Your final survival is the survival of the soul, a quiet victory achieved not by running from the cross, but by running back to the cross, guided forever by the memory of a single, sorrowful look. The journey ends here, leaving the listener with a sense of quietude, the overwhelming weight of the world gently lifted, replaced by the deep, gentle peace of forgiveness and eternal rest.